The state of the internet as we know it is changing by the day. What was legal and okay yesterday is going to be criminal today or tomorrow. We have so many lawsuits I already covered on this channel. You know, the Amazon, the Epic Games, which are just the biggest of the names. And there's other cases as well, which were massive UX failures for random reasons. Some were dark patterns, some were crappy design decisions, leadership issues, and so forth. But today what I want to talk to you about is the accessibility and actually designing things with an inclusivity-first approach instead of just going with a mobile-first approach and just banging out different mockups for the sake of it. And usually the negative examples are the ones which resonates with design leaders or growing designers to actually make better decisions tomorrow. But take a look at this, for example, and you can see that there is 6 million National Federation of the Blind versus Target Corporation, 1.5 million Deaf versus Harvard, 700,000 versus Netflix. And I'm gonna tell you exactly why it's such a big deal right now, because any individual can actually, sue digital products or services outright without any hesitation today. If we put them all together, 10 years ago you had like under 3,000 lawsuits. That's 4 times the climb across the different states. Of course, US compared to the rest of the world is going to be very different. 10 years ago, maybe you had 1,000 or so lawsuits per state, like California, let's say. Now you have 5,000. So it went 6 times up, and it's probably going to climb if you see just the trend itself. The only thing which is surprising is that Florida went down. So this is probably a signal and a trend that people caught up and the businesses started to invest more in accessible services, or maybe using vetted or tried and tested services of the digital agencies and better designers who actually fight for the digital rights or civil rights of actual users and make it inclusive and accessible from the get-go. And depends, of course, on different states and all that sample sizing, but it primarily involves the e-commerce lawsuits. Literally thousands of the lawsuits which contain a specific person or specific entity versus a corporation or versus a company like this, for example. It's not about the person too, so I'm just calling out because it's publicly available, but you can see that this plaintiff versus this Hips Apparel raising the accessibility claim. And if I go on that website, it's a simple e-commerce site, right? Like with some video backgrounds, things of that nature. I immediately can see some of the issues. It's probably not screen reader friendly. We do design a lot of things just because it looks cool, and it could look usable for average Joe out there, but not so much for specific segments. And if you design a public website, you design for all. An excuse, let's say here, could be that we target only a specific segment of a market, but if it's open for anyone to purchase, then you don't have that excuse. And someone like that, for example, a person who has a deafness or some sort of vision impairment, or literally thousands of other different bits, which could be physical, could be neurodivergent, could be a lot of other factors which come into play. I'm not even gonna dive, let's say, into like Microsoft's free bans, of like the temporary, situational, and permanent disabilities, and what do they mean, and how do you need to design for them. But there is a lot in this to consider. It's just an example. I'm not like handpicking, I'm literally clicking on a random takes, but this one is also accessibility unfriendly. And that looks just like any other e-commerce shop. Could be drop shipping, could be brand, some sort of owned e-commerce website. I can see that there is a contrast issues here by black on blue. Potentially doesn't land. Usually when it comes to the actual lawsuits, anyone can make a claim. The claims are usually built on top of something solid. It's not just like a tiny contrast issue here and there. Usually to do, let's say, with unclarity or maybe wrong purchase, where we didn't intend to do so, or misguiding them because wasn't accessible enough. Some of this is also super specific to the US, let's say the ADA, which I personally worked with e-commerce websites in US, so I know that you had to be ADA compliant on a lot of different things, and a lot of designs literally bounced back, let's say, where you had to create something playful, but you couldn't because the contrast was the issue, or let's say the design was way too funky to be interpreted well or structured for screen reading abilities, or be implemented in a way where it's, cost effective, but also accessible enough. It's nothing new for a lot of people out there, but the fresh designers do make that mistake where we think that if they create something responsive, that's accessible enough because you can access it on a mobile phone. That's not what accessibility is at all. Think about inclusion. Inclusion means including everyone to be able to use your specific product or service, and individuals with disabilities are protected from discrimination under the law, which means that if they feel discriminated or they cannot use your product which is publicly available on the web, they can file a lawsuit. So if the companies or business owners, maybe your boss or you yourself, just ignore all of that and go for a flashy design, not thinking about the actual underlying UX, then you're in actual danger. And especially because to make things inaccessible these days is quite hard. It's almost like I'm quite surprised when I see, let's say, e-commerce websites which makes those mistakes when they can use those tried and tested templates which usually are accessible, and if they aren't, you can use their test with more people, and you as a designer can invite someone, let's say, who could be a user, maybe elderly person, maybe they have temporary disability, maybe it's situational where we cannot use a specific thing on their phone, let's say. You can test with enough of the samples and use a lot of those user testing services which would provide you with enough capture. And of course there is a lot of other acts out there which you need to look into it, like let's say most recently I've shown the COPPA, C-O-P-P-A, which is Children's Protection Act, where everything you design which is public or accessible to children now has to include you researching and testing it with children to understand if they understand what the product is about, and so that you don't misuse it or don't abuse their privacy and basically protect their data in a rightful manner. So that's yet another thing to consider. Just a monthly recap, 238 in just 1 month in 2023. Consumer durables and apparel, probably dropshipping websites, landing pages, easy kind of pushes, you know, the templated stuff approach where anyone, absolutely anyone can just design thing and push and just kind of forget about all the different laws and, you know, needs and stuff until it's too late. Food, beverage, tobacco, retail is all about shopping, and absolutely anyone can do the shopping these days, and they have to be able to do that. And an interesting theme, an odd one at that, but 10 plaintiffs filed 42% of all monthly accessibility lawsuits, which means that people are actively looking for these opportunities and products which are actually inaccessible. And so there's even more motivation to keep the things tidy. And one more point to highlight is that we detected that 4% of litigated websites in August are using third-party accessibility overlay tools, which is a typical cop-out in product or businesses which just want to shortcut this. It basically adds a widget into any product which is public or not, which enhances a little bit of the accessibility options. Ultimately, it doesn't impact the structure of how the things are architected or how they're coded. Again, nothing replaces being diligent with those things, researching enough, engaging with the right customer segment, capturing their needs, and then making the product changes, those interventions which are well needed. But only the 4% used that, meaning everyone else is not even considering about the actual needs of the public. So, I hope you found this informative. If so, share this, because it must be talked about more. It's, you know, it's not just individual cases anymore. This is a real deal, which we still tend to overlook somewhat. And it's relevant not just for UXers, researchers, or designers, but also product leaders out there and the business leaders, the new entrepreneurs who might just think that they can launch a website with one click and then forget about it. But what happens is usually very costly in the end for everyone. And that's about it. I'll see you next time.